welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen.
With me today is abundance teacher and money coach, Jody Lynn Craven.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. Jody Lynn, there's a cliche that kind of bounces around and appears in conversations periodically. And the cliche is, would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? Enough. Few of us seem to learn from that one. I haven't quite figured out why that is, but I guess that's why the cliche keeps coming back over and over again, right? Because we all say, "Oh yeah, sure, yeah, I'd rather be happy than right," and then we're out. The next time we're in disagreement, we're trying to be right again. It's like an addiction or something,
100%.
So the good news is we have an expert who's going to join us today to actually perhaps tell us how to get out of that trap.
Ooh, wonderful.
Her name is Valerie Greene, and she is a relationship coach. She works with couples. She works with women in relationships. She works with single women. And her agenda is basically help stop the fighting and, get back to the love part, which, by the way, is, that's what the relationship was about. I forgot. So, Valerie, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I know I'm doing great. I love this topic because it is near and dear to my heart. Of course, I'm happy to share anything that you want about it. But yes, I love helping people transform conflict into intimacy, as I say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good goal to have every time for sure. But tell us a little bit about how you got to do this in the first place, because there's usually a good, like a meaty story that leads into this kind of thing.
It's true. I know. I mean, and I tell it a lot of different ways. I never know how I'm going to channel it today. But going way back, and to make a long story short, my father was very, very loving. I don't want to make it seem like he was anything other than loving, because he was. And he also had a lot of wounding with his father. And so his communication was coming from a good place, but it was only confrontational. It was, I have to be right, my way or the highway, you're going to do this because I said so. And all we did was argue when I was a kid, because that's all I was modeled. And so it kind of created in me this insatiable drive to learn how to resolve conflict. Although I didn't know that at the time, because I didn't know that I would spend my whole 20s, getting into relationships that started out great in the beginning. But then, I, after the honeymoon phase ended, we would just it started out great, but then, so I didn't want to fight. So I would sweep conflict under the rug, and because all I knew was either fighting, or what my mom modeled for me was just be nice instead. And, just sort of be nice to keep the peace. And so those were the only things that were modeled for me. So I was like, okay, well, I don't want to argue. I'm going to be the nice one. But then, of course, I wasn't in touch with my feelings or needs and how to express them in a collaborative way. And so inevitably, things would build, and I'd be like, why didn't you do this? Or why'd you do that? And then we'd be arguing. And then eventually we'd be sleeping in separate beds. And this would just happen over and over again in my 20s, just in every serial monogamous relationship I had. This is back in the early part of, I'm 46 now. So this was around the millennium. So it had happened enough time through all the relationships in my 20s that finally I was just like, what the hell do I do about this? Excuse my language. I need to learn how to resolve this. And it brought me back to my childhood, and all I'd learned was confrontational language. And so then I just dedicated myself to learning how to resolve conflict. And of course I used that in the trenches of my own relationships. And I wound up, doing 5 coaching trainings, but that didn't go deep enough. So then I've actually been trained in emotionally focused therapy, although I'm not a therapist, so I can't get certified. And I did John Gottman's level 1 and 2 training, and I've done a myriad of emotional healing modalities, and including nonviolent communication, and really using those tools in the trenches with my clients. And so I actually started out as a health coach in 2005, believe it or not, but because I didn't feel confident with my own relationship skills. But what wound up happening was, and this is how it kind of veers into the law of attraction, because I believe the law of attraction is not something that you use superficially. It's like we attract who we're being.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely.
And so of course I can talk about that too, but it's like, so who I was being was just like really present and compassionate and empathic with my clients. And so they'd like come to me because they wanted to lose weight or stop emotional eating, and then it always wound up being that like the reason they were emotional eating or the reason they were having trouble losing weight because they were having problems in their relationships, and that's what I wound up helping them solve instead. And then that made it so that they no longer had the desire to act out with these emotions, because I taught them how to deal with their emotions. And I was like, wait a minute, this is actually what I'm meant to be doing. And so that's what caused me to go out and get all this additional training for the next 10 years. And I started out working with couples, and I was actually really skilled at working with couples. But then what happened was when I would do marketing to couples, I'd inevitably get one person reaching out and saying, my partner doesn't want to participate. Will this still work? So then I started marketing to just the women, because if one person changes, then the relationship system changes. So that worked too. So that was my second niche. So then single women started reaching out too and saying, well, I keep attracting the wrong person again and again. What do I do? And it's similar work to solve that inner conflict within ourselves, to be available to intimacy. And so then that became my third niche, is working with single women to help them to stop attracting unavailable partners. And I'd written so much at that point that it turned into a book called The Commitment Roadmap, which is available on my website, that of course I'm happy to talk about. But yeah, so now, like, that was literally 20 years ago that I started. And so now I can happily say that I work with anybody with any relationship issue, even grieving a breakup. And, also I do love helping couples transform conflict into intimacy, which is the main topic today. But obviously, if that doesn't work, then I help people to heal themselves and to decide what's possible in the relationship and whether you should stay or leave. And if you leave, grieve, and then take stock of your red flags that you missed, and do the healing work and become emotionally available to yourself so that you can then attract somebody who is more right for you. Or if the relationship problem is caused by conflict, then we have to heal that first to see what's possible.
Yeah. As you were describing that too, I thought about a conversation I had with one of my other co-hosts. I have three co-hosts. Jody Lynn, obviously, is one of them. Anne-Marie does a show with me on Mondays. And then my friend Joel, who I've known since pretty much when I started the podcast 12 and a half years ago, does a second show with me on Mondays. And Joel and I were talking. We'd been doing a lot of shows about manifesting lately. And he said to me at one point, let's not do any more shows about manifesting. I'm really tired of it. Let's just do something else for a while. And then, of course, we got a request from my VA, what's it going to take to stop manifesting something? And, or more precisely, how do I manifest what I really want? How do I make manifestation happen? And we both burst out laughing when we saw it, partly because of what he had said, and partly because we both agreed, you can't stop manifesting. Manifesting happens all the time. I mean, it's not like you can just say, okay, here's the stop of it. But if you want to change it, you have to shift yourself in order to get something different. But
exactly,
stop manifesting. It's like, that's absurd. Nobody can do it.
Yeah, exactly. I know. It's so funny. Right. We're always manifesting whatever we're putting our attention on. Either what we want or what we don't want. So of course we can talk about that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there's a lot to be explored that's quite valid there. The other thought that was going through my mind is I have neighbors who are classic in the context of what we're talking about here, in that they fight frequently between each other, and it's always about trying to be right. And then they have a daughter that they're always trying to be right with the daughter, and the daughter plays the same game, and then she gets shot down for it. And they never notice the pattern. And of course, when you're outside, it's really easy to see. When you're inside it, it's really, really hard to notice it. But you look from outside, you say, are you guys ever going to learn? I mean, come on. And yet they don't seem to. And it's such an interesting phenomenon that we do have so much trouble noticing this going on in our own lives.
Mm-hmm.
It's true. Yeah, and Jody Lynn, of course, feel free to chime in. I don't, I don't mean to steal the spotlight, but I always will. Give me an in.
You run with it, Valerie.
But yeah, I mean, so I hear kind of like, because of your intro, an implicit question about why do we do that, and I do have, my intuitive answer about that, because I have actually done a 2-year comprehensive training in a somatic psychotherapy modality called Hakomi, which they the second year was all about learning the developmental wounds in childhood and what limiting beliefs you come up with from that. Basically, like, we all have an ego, and our ego hates being made wrong. And
Thanks for pointing
that's what the ego is made up of, right? It's made up about beliefs about who we are. And that's why in Dale Carnegie's famous book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, literally the first principle is never criticize anybody. Because when we do, the automatic defensiveness always comes up inside of us to prove the positive intention why we did it. Because nobody ever thinks that we have a negative intention. Nobody ever thinks, and this is the thing, like, even if we actually have a negative intention, I'm not going to mention the things that people judge in the world right now, but we can sort of imagine one thing that you're judging, just as an example. Whichever side you're on, there's some negative thing that we're judging, right? That the people who are doing that have a positive intention. They're rationalizing. The reason I'm doing this is to help people in some way. Like, everybody thinks they have a positive intention. And we need to do that in order to feel good about ourselves. That's the nature of the ego. And unless we have a very strong mindfulness practice to observe the ego rather than be identified with it, then we are. And so that's why usually, although John Gottman says that criticism and defensiveness are 2 of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that kill relationships.
I love that. Sure, yeah.
That's what we tend to do. And it's because that's how our ego is programmed for survival. All of this is a survival impulse. Because if we're wrong, then our biology tells us that we're going to be kicked out of the tribe, and we're not going to be able to survive on our own, because our biology hasn't evolved very much in the past 10,000 years since we did live in tribes. And our survival was based on being accepted by the tribe. And so that need to be accepted is so important. And that if we feel like we're wrong, that we might be shamed for being wrong, then it's a survival instinct. Now, of course, if we have a mindfulness practice where we can see that that's just our survival and we have higher values that we want to uphold, and that this person has feelings and needs underneath, and that's why they're acting like that, then of course we don't have to get pulled into this right-wrong debate. But if we're triggered, because what happens when we get triggered is the blood drains out of our thinking brain and goes into our arms so we can fight and our legs so we can run away. We can't think straight to catch ourselves when we're like automatically, I do this with my husband still. It's like, sometimes I'm just busy, which is my, not very good excuse. When I'm busy, sometimes if I'm in a hurry, I forget to use my own tools and I make him wrong. Why didn't you do this?
We just don't help.
Yeah.
And then he gets defensive. Like, that was my positive intention, but I did it because of this. Why you said you would wash the dishes today and you didn't. It's like, but you know what I was doing yesterday. I didn't have time, and then we're like, but you said, we still argue sometimes too, when I'm not conscious. So, that's my first, teaching in how to resolve conflict, is that when somebody is trying to be right, that they have they need their point of view to be validated, but there's always a way to validate somebody's point of view without agreeing.
That's a great point.
So, so of course I can talk about that, but
yes, please do. I think that's a fine, like, tightrope there.
Absolutely.
Especially because I think the assumption too is that, or this is how I feel often when I'm not conscious of, how I'm feeling, I'm just triggered. I'm not thinking. All of the blood is run to my fists and I want to fight. Yes. The first thing that always comes up is that their intention was negative. Their intention was to hurt me, to piss me off, whatever it was. And something that I always reflect on is like, is that absolutely true? Like, my husband loves me and he adores me. Would he do that to hurt me? Probably not. Not consciously anyway. Okay, I can stop this I need to be right conversation and start actually looking at some other things here. But I love that you said we can validate things without agreeing. And I'd love to know how you do that.
Yeah, exactly. I do. I'd like to know, because I actually have an application for it. I run a business where I have a bunch of people who are gardeners working for me. And this situation came up recently in which one was being right and the other one was being offended. And as I'm talking to the one who was trying to be right, I said, I understand what you're saying, but you have to understand there are two issues here. There's the right issue and there's the offended issue. And he kept going back to the right issue. I couldn't even get him to look at the offended issue. He had to keep going back to the right issue. So I'm really curious to see what you're going to say.
Yeah. So, I mean, the way I look at it is, like, I like to share an analogy. You've probably heard this one, like the 3 blind men and the elephant.
Oh, yes.
No, I haven't heard it.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah. So the story is that there's 3 blind men who's trying to understand what an elephant looks like. And so they walk up to him, and, like, one's on the trunk and the other's, like, on the leg and the other's on the tail. And the one on the trunk says, an elephant is like a hose. See, it can, it's really long and it can spray, look, it makes noise, and then look, it's like it's like a hose. And then the one on the leg is like, you're wrong. It's like a tree trunk. Look, I could wrap both my arms around it. And the one on the tail is like, you're both wrong. It's like a broom. Look, it sweeps back and forth. And so the question is, who's right?
Mm-hmm.
They all are.
Right. No, exactly. I mean, it's sort of a paradox. They all are from their unique vantage point.
Right.
But none of them are, because none of them see the big picture. They would have to share their unique vantage points with each other to get the big picture. And so that's the premise here, is that if I was to validate, if I was to walk in and say, well, you're standing at the trunk, so from your point of view, it makes sense that it looks like a hose. And you're standing at the tail, so from your point of view, it makes sense that it looks like a broom. But it only makes sense from your unique point of view, and
that makes sense.
Now the question is, how we have a really great analogy. How do we actually apply that, though? That's the really interesting part.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, I don't know if you feel like you want to share the specific example that they were fighting about, or if that violates.
I can't give you a lot of details for obvious reasons, but I can tell you that it had to do with how you do what they call edging, which is basically how you outline a garden. And the way one was doing it was wrong according to the way the other thought it should have been done.
Right. And, like, I think that's actually a good example, because there technically is a best practice. I mean, I'm not a gardener, so I don't know what it is. But what I always talk about is feelings first, facts second. That's the way to address any issue where there's an argument. So when I'm talking about feelings, I'm not only talking about emotions. There's 2 aspects to an emotion. There's a feeling and there's a need. And they're very related. And this is what I'll call it compassionate communication, because Marshall Rosenberg says that he wishes he'd called NVC compassionate communication, but the nonviolent name stuck. So it's like, I'm going to put myself in that example. Let's say I'm the person who wants to do the edge a different way. And I haven't checked like the best practices, but this is just like, I want to do it this way because this is the way that my family taught me to do it. Right. I've always been, this is a tradition. My family's been gardening for 3 generations and they taught me to do it this way. Right. And the other person, let's say they looked it up in, a gardening website that's current and it's like actually the best practice that's agreed upon by all the experts now. So they're going to argue about it. Mm-hmm. But what's underneath each person's point of view is their feelings and needs or values. And so if you validate their feelings or needs or values first, then they feel validated, then they get out of fight or flight because you're not challenging their feelings and needs and values. Then they're more likely to get shared reality about the best practice. So what that means is if you could guide one person, like, first of all, you'd have to, instead of explaining to him what he should do, you'd have to validate his point of view. I understand that the reason that you're explaining your point of view is because you've done the research and you're factually right. Mm-hmm. That makes sense. You are factually right. And I imagine that there's a reason that the other person is arguing a different point of view. Let's find out what that reason is. So tell me about your point of view. And oh, that makes sense that you want to do it that way because that's the way it's always been done in your family. So that gives you a sense of comfort and belonging to know that that's always the way. It makes you feel connected to your family to do it that way. Is that what it provides for you? What does it provide for you to do it that way? Until he gives you the real answer, whatever it is. No, that's not it. It's just that, I've always done it that way and I don't want to change. Oh, so it feels comfortable for you to do it this way and it's been working for you. So you want to do what's been working for you because change feels uncomfortable. Is that it? So it's like you keep on trying to validate the person's point of view until you got it. And that might not be either. It might be you want to do it this way for the sake of efficiency because it's worked in the past, so I change it. Mm-hmm. Whatever it is, until they say, yes, I feel validated, they're not going to stop digging their heels in. But once they are, and then you say that makes sense, then you can say, I have a different idea. Are you willing to hear mine? And usually once they feel validated, they're more open to hear it. Like, it makes total sense. You want to do this for the sake of efficiency. My concern about that is I actually researched it and found a more efficient way to do it. Are you open to hearing that? Now, if, for example, the person's not open to hearing it, then they might have a concern, right? What are you concerned would happen if you did hear my suggestion? Oh, I just don't want to be bothered. It's too much. Oh, okay. So you're maxed out right now and you don't have, you can't handle any more change. Is that it? Right. So you're like trying to get the point of view of the person. And usually when a person is completely validated in their feelings, their needs, their values, the reason why they want it that way, usually then they're open to hearing the other person's point of view after that, but not before that. That's why we have to be generous and validate their point of view first, but we don't have to agree. Notice I'm not agreeing that that's the best practice. I'm just validating the reason why he wants to do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'm gathering from what you're saying that the ideal is for each person who's involved in the dispute to do that for the other person, to validate the other person's viewpoint.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is it really depends on the type of relationship, right? So, like, for example, if it's a parent-child relationship, it's the job of the parent to do this for the child and not the child's job to do this for the parent, right? If it's a relationship between a married couple and it's always one person validating the other and the other can never validate the point of view of the first person, that's also a problem, right? But what I would say is if you think that's happening, then try validating the other person's point of view and then asking if they're able to see yours. And if they're not, asking questions. I have inside my 6-week online course, which is called the Manifest Lasting Love 6-week home study course. I do actually have a flow chart in there where I teach this whole process about how to validate the other person's point of view by asking a lot of open-ended questions to understand the deeper beliefs, the deeper history, the deeper concerns, the deeper desires under their point of view, and validate that. And that if both people feel validated in the underlying desires and fears and beliefs and history around their point of view, usually they're then open to doing the same thing for the other person. And that my system when I work with couples is that we don't try to solve the issue until they can validate each other's point of view in a very deep level where they both really feel seen and heard and gotten. And that's what makes them feel like, okay, now we're on the same team. And until they feel that way, then you can't really solve the problem. Because then you're going to argue about it. But like once you feel that way, then you can be creative together, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Jody Lynn, I mean, it sounds very much like what you do with your, Jody Lynn is a money coach. She helps people work through financial issues and so forth. And it sounds very similar to the kinds of things you do when you're working with people in that field.
Especially the feeling. It's more, I focus more inward. And even like when it comes to my external world, I always go in first. And it's funny that you said feelings then facts. Because that's the first thing that if anything happens, life blows up, I get into a fight, whatever. The first thing I do is I come back to center and like, how do I feel? What do I feel? Like, why do I even feel this way? Because I feel like for a long time in my life, I never asked those questions. I would just trigger and go. Let's fight. I want to run, whatever. I didn't have that same compassion for myself or other people. Then I can really see, I'm making a lot of assumptions about what they've said and the way that I have perceived and internalized what that means. And that's really what hurts my feelings. And then I've probably spent the last decade asking really tough questions, specifically to my husband, of like, you said this, but did you mean this? Because this is how I interpreted it. And he'd be like, no, like, what? No, not at all. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then we can start having that collaborative conversation of like, oh, this was my assumption because of whatever it was. And I find in my coaching practice around money, we make a lot of assumptions of like what we should have, how we should be doing it, what other people think about us with or without money, or because we have this car or we don't have this car, or like everything. And that's not the context of money, because we do it with everything: success, life, relationships, like every single line item. We're like, everybody's looking at me and they think this. And newsflash, nobody's really looking. I don't really care.
I think not at least the people that you care about.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Well, that's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah. Yep. And seeing that from other people's perspective. I think that was like phase 2 for me of, they said this and it hurt. This was the relationship with my mom where I really had to work on this. Like, she wasn't in a place to validate my feelings or really go on that journey with me. And I had to validate my own feelings and where it was coming from. And not that it was absolutely true, but it's okay to feel those things. And then I was able to open up to this space to really see her in a different light, outside of the things that she said or the things that she has done that have hurt me, and really going to the core of her as a human being and a woman and my mother, and loving me because I'm her child. And it's kind of instinctual. So going to all of that and looking at the problem like, oh, okay, I can see that I'm making assumptions, and that the core of her, it's coming from a good place. Like you said, the intention was good, delivery not so good. And really, when I started to open up that door to see her intention, and it probably started validating her own feelings in ways that I never have before, our relationship completely changed. And she didn't do those things to me. Like, she didn't pick on me. She didn't start fights with me. Like, our relationship is vastly different when I had the courage to validate myself and then begin looking and validating her.
I'm curious to know what your take is on a sort of a tangent to what you've been talking about validating the feelings before you get at the facts. And I guess where it comes to my mind, it happens most frequently in the political realm, although it happens in all realms too. But you often see it in the political realm. The thing I'm about to talk about is victimhood. People being in a victim mindset. And right. I can see that there could be circumstances in which if you validate the feelings of the victim in the victim mindset, they're going to say, great, now I can be a victim even more. So I'm wondering, how do you adjust for that with what you're talking about?
That's such a good question. I'm really glad you asked it. Because it's really important to separate, feelings from thoughts. And when you're validating, it's really, really important to validate the feelings and the positive intention behind why the person is doing what they're doing, but not to validate their thinking, especially if they have a victim mindset. So like, for example, if someone comes to me and they're like, I do this for clients, but of course you're welcome to come up with other examples. If they come to me and they're telling me like, my boyfriend is such an asshole. He does this and this and this to me, and I'm feeling breadcrumbed, and he's not treating me well, and whatever. I always validate. It makes sense that you feel disrespected. Tell me what he's done that you feel that way. And then she'll tell me the whole story, and he did this and this and this, and it was so wrong for him to do this and this and this, and he's an asshole and whatever. Excuse my language, but I don't know how your listeners are with it.
The FCC has no say at all in this program. So
I'm laughing, but obviously when I'm with this person, I'm not laughing. I'm more heart-centered, but this is us talking about it. So, what I'll say is, it makes total sense that you feel that way. It makes total sense that you're perceiving it that way. How do you want to be with those feelings? Let's take your attention off of him for a while. What is it that you need instead? You need him to treat you respectfully. What would that look like? How would that feel if he did? Now, how could you ask for it from him? Right? But so then she feels more empowered because she knows how to ask for it. Then I put the attention on the other person and say, he must have had feelings and needs too that caused him to do that. Nobody, if he did something to hurt you, that's probably a deal breaker, right? So we need to find out. Of course, there's a possibility that he intended to hurt you. And then, of course, you can tell him that's a deal breaker. But he might have done it for another reason. Let's guess what the other reason might be. It might have been he didn't call you back when he said he would because he had an emergency. It might have been that he was stuck at work and he didn't tell you. So then a request that you could make is that if he is not going to do something, that he texts you and let you know that he's not going to do it. But how would you feel if somebody said, how could you do this to me? You were so disrespectful. I need you to do that different. Obviously, they're not going to respond well to that. So that's why I have to get her out of the victim mindset first, to see this is an opportunity for you to make a request. And, dating is about seeing if the person can honor your requests and boundaries. So this is a good vetting opportunity. Let's see if when you ask how he responds, if he responds and he doesn't, and he says yes and he doesn't do it, then that could be a red flag. That could show that he doesn't value integrity. I don't know. We need to keep putting attention on that. But the only way that you'll know is if you switch from a victim mindset to an empowered mindset and have the courage to ask for something different. But you can't do that in a way that's making him wrong. You need to validate. I'm sure there's some good reason why you didn't call. What is it? I want to know. I'm curious. And then validate it. And then if he's hemming and hawing and, oh, I just forgot. oh, okay, well, I hear that. I feel kind of concerned because I really value integrity. I'm curious if you value the same thing.
Good question.
There's the beginning of a very interesting conversation.
Yeah.
But first we need to self-soothe and challenge our limiting beliefs that he did it on purpose. Because there's no way, if I'm feeling like a victim, in order to be able to ask for something in a collaborative way. Because if I feel like a victim, the only thing that I can do is make the other person wrong. And so it's challenging the thinking. There must be a good reason why he did that. Now, that doesn't mean it's a good reason in your book. If it's a bad reason and he keeps making things for a bad reason according to your value system, he's probably not the right person for you.
Right.
And that's how vetting works. You know, it's like I coach a lot of women, especially with anxious attachment, which is another one of my niches, is healing insecure attachment, who think that the purpose of dating is to like act in a way that makes the guy like her, you know, rather than, you know, really know your vision and your values and your standards, and, you know, have the self-confidence to ask the tough questions to see if he does share those things, which takes a lot of courage. And I like to talk about how to transform anxiety into courage, because cœur is the French word for heart, and that's where the word courage comes from. And it's really about, as Jody Lynn so wonderfully expressed, learning how to validate yourself and your own feelings and needs on a deeper level, and do the deeper healing work, which might be the inner child work, or it might be challenging limiting beliefs, to really come from an empowered place, so that when I'm talking, like, I'll give that example. It's funny, I give that on my last interview too, but it's a long story. I have a few injuries in my body right now, so I can't wash dishes. And so my husband, whose job is not to wash the dishes, usually now he's washing the dishes, but he's not really doing it every day because he can't, like, and he told me that, like, you know, so, but like a lot of times I'm like, there's no clean water bottles. I have to leave for the city. Like, you know, so it's like, I need to soothe myself and not make him wrong, make an agreement that he'd do it every day. He just told me he would do it because it needs to be done, but I can't get mad at him because it's not his job. So it's about me validating the positive reason, like, hey, I understand that it's not your job and you told me you didn't have time, and at the same time I'm leaving for the city in an hour and there's no clean water bottle. Is there, you can make time to wash it right now? You know, I'm not making him wrong, I'm making a request, you know, and like, then he'll respond well to that, you know, because like collaborative request. But if I'm making him wrong, like, you're supposed to do the dishes and like, I don't have a clean water bottle, then he'll just get defensive, like, you know, I don't have time. And and then we'll be arguing. Side value, you know, then I'm like, I know it's not your job, and you know, like, maybe I could take
We're getting some audio problem.
Yeah.
Win-win solutions is, if see me, I don't know what's happening. Yeah. Not sure what's happening, but can you see me now?
Yeah, now
No, it's you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Your image and your voice are freezing up, which usually means there's something running in the background of your computer that's trying to do too many things at once.
Yeah, which is weird because I quit all the other things.
I remember you said that. Yeah, so I was trying to figure out why.
Oh well, hopefully it doesn't happen again. So what I was saying is, like, once both people validate each other's feelings and needs, then, like, for example, in that case, I need functionality. Because we always boil it down to like a need versus a strategy. The need is functionality. The strategy is having a clean water bottle, right? His need is effectiveness. He's trying to do something else with his time. And so how can we have effectiveness and functionality? Needs don't conflict, strategies conflict. So maybe,
I love that.
Yeah, it's one of the primary tenets of nonviolent communication that makes it not a communication modality, but a consciousness raising modality. Because it's like, if I know that there's 1,000 ways to get a need met, then I don't have to be demanding when I ask. You know, so it's like, if I'm like, so we get to the bottom of it and we find out that I need functionality and he needs effectiveness with his work. And so then we can brainstorm solutions. How can we have both? That's what the essence of a win-win solution is finding out, getting to the bottom and keeping on asking, like, you know how a little kid asks why 100 times. Well, why is it like this? Well, why is it? So it's like, keep on asking, if you had that, what would that provide for you? If you had that, what would that provide for you? If you had that, what would that provide for you? Until you get to the core need. Because for me, it's like, the water bottle is not the core need. The core need is functionality. I need to be able to go to the city and like leave on time and actually have that be workable. So I get to my appointment on time and I'm not dehydrated. You know, it's like functionality or health, let's say. Versus his need is effectiveness. Like, he can't take his attention off what he's doing then because like he has a deadline or whatever. Then we can brainstorm solutions. Maybe if there's no clean water bottle and I can't wash it, I could walk to the deli and, you know, on the way to the train and buy a water bottle. You know, so it's like, if we brainstorm solutions together, or like I could come up with that idea on my own, of course. But if I know what my need is, then there might be other strategies of meeting it. What's functionality mean? It just means I have water. Okay, what are all the ways that I can get that? Like, maybe I can drink water really quick right now so that when I'm heading into the city, I won't be thirsty. And then when I get to my appointment, they have a water cooler there and I can just drink that. But it's like, if it's just me coming up with that on my own, I might not feel resourceful enough. But if I tell him what I need and I validate what he needs and then we brainstorm solutions together, then maybe he'll have an idea that sparks my idea. And so that's basically I know that it sounds simple, but it is simple, but it's not easy. Right?
More solutions actually are. That's not really a surprise. But I love the fact Jody Lynn is actually our note taker. She'll take, you know, consummate notes. I mean, she's just note taking. I'm just sitting talking and having a conversation. I wrote this one down. I don't write notes down very often. Needs don't conflict, strategies conflict. I mean, that's one of the most concise, beautifully phrased things I've ever heard. That's really good. Thank you for that.
Yes,
that's big.
Yeah.
It is one of the primary tenets of nonviolent communication, you know, is that
because we tend to think that needs conflict, right? What's the one thing that people most often say about a primary relationship? Well, you have to be ready to compromise. That's is there anything that's said more frequently about how to have a successful relationship than that? I don't think there is. I think it's probably the number one phrase. And your phrase gives the lie to that. Like, no, it has nothing to do with the needs.
Right. Yeah. And we do have to compromise our strategies, right? Like, and you know, sometimes I'm like really attached to a certain strategy. Like, I really want to buy this pair of pants or whatever. But that meets my need for self-expression, let's say. And there's 100 million other ways that I could express myself if like the pants don't fit into my budget. So, but it's like, I need to be aware of that. And it does feel like a loss if we're letting go of a strategy that we're really attached to. Totally. And so sometimes we need to mourn that. But I like to look at, it's funny, like one of my friends actually told me this, that sacrifice is giving up something good for something better.
Ooh, that's a good one too.
So it's like, of course, I need to sacrifice my strategy, but what do I get in return? You know, it's that feeling of that deep intimacy and connection that I'm looking for.
Right.
My husband and I just had a scenario just like this. It was really funny. It's all of the words that you're saying just written all over it. I was just in a really emotional place, stuff happening with my family. Anyway, we're looking at building a house. And so we start talking about something with the house and we're just kind of going back and forth. And then he goes into like, oh, well, we could go this route and we could go this route. We could go this route. We just paid a deposit to start like designing and building with this one company, and then he was throwing all of these other areas of like ideas out there, and I would just like, not my finest moment. Snapped, lose it. Fine, we're just gonna live in here for the rest of our lives and then die. And he's like, whoa. And I really had to like think about it. I would love your opinion on it. The things that I came up with, and I'll tell you how it ended after, but I realized that when he was saying all of that, my need is to continue to move forward and go in a direction. And I have this need for details and information. Like, I like to know where we're headed. That makes me feel safe. Not that that's necessarily absolutely true, that I need to know every single detail to be safe. And I'm working on understanding that. But when he threw all those things at me, I was like, I don't know which direction we're going in. We're never going to build a house. Like, this is retarded. I don't want to do this anymore. I give up. Goodbye. Like, that was it. And so
it sounds like you felt really overwhelmed with all the choices.
Very overwhelmed. All of these things. And then so, you know, whatever, he gives me a little space and I think about it and whatever. Eventually we come back to the conversation, and I had come down a whole bunch. And I said, you know, when you said all of those things, it's like you're like stealing my dream from me. And I don't know, like, you pulled the carpet right out from underneath my feet, and I don't know where we're going now. Like, we had a direction, and now you gave me 17 other directions, and I have no idea which direction that we're going in. And I realized that the house is the thing that I want. I don't really care how we get it, whether it's that company or this company, or you build it ourselves or whatever. I just want the house. So, okay, I can let go of how we get there. And he was like, oh, I was just throwing shit out there to get it off my mind. Like, I wasn't serious about any of those things that I was saying. I was just like, oh, we could do this and we could do. He was just letting it all out, all the things that were in his head. And me, I took that for fact. Oh, now we're not going this way. We're going to go this way. When he was just brainstorming, essentially, all of the things that were in his head. I was so wrong, but it was hilarious because I just couldn't control the emotion in that moment. Fine, we're never building. Bye.
Right? We've all been there. I mean, everybody's been there. We've all done that
for sure,
one time or another.
It's human.
I think it's a great example, actually, you know, of how we hear what the person said and we make a story up about it, but we don't realize that we're doing that. And then we react to that story, and then we get triggered, and then we act out because we're triggered when actually it's not even what he meant. So yeah, I mean, but it's up to you. I mean, do you want me to talk about how I would, like, if a couple came to me with that?
Well, I think it's an awesome, like, I feel like I have more clarity on it now and I feel better about it, but always more tools is always better, in my opinion. So I would love to.
So I mean, if I was, you know, if I had both of you in front of me, basically what I would do is I would validate both of your points of view first. I would say, like, from your point of view, you really need clarity on the direction that you're choosing. That's what makes you feel safe. And you got really overwhelmed with all of the different possibilities that came up. And that makes sense. You got overwhelmed because you need clarity, you know. And then I would turn to him and I would say, you know, tell me, you know, what was your intention in listing all those possibilities? And then he would have said, I was just doing a brain dump, basically.
Yeah.
And so what he needed was to just be acknowledged for his creativity, probably.
Yeah.
And so then I would have you validate each other's point of view, you know, once we clarify it. And in this case, that takes care of it, right? Because it was a misunderstanding. But if it didn't take care of it, like, let's say he really was attached to one of his strategies, then we could go deeper. We can say, what does it provide for him to do that? And you need clarity about the direction you're going. He wants to try out different strategies. So he's not clear on the direction, but then what is he clear about? So then he could tell you what he is clear about. I'm clear that I'm only going to pursue these 2 strategies for 3 months, and in 3 months I'll have my decision, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
What do you need to hear from me in order to feel reassured that eventually we will choose a direction and have clarity?
Yeah. Great questions.
And then for him, maybe he still needs to be acknowledged for his creativity. So then I would ask you, are you willing to acknowledge him for his creativity now that you feel reassured, and appreciate him for having the ideas now that you're no longer triggered by them? So it's like we create strategies to meet each other's needs. And then if there is a solution that needs to come up, let's say you needed clarity now and you can't handle it if you don't, and he wants to try strategies now, then you can say something like, you can come up with, all right, what does that provide for you to have it now? And is there something he is really clear on that would give you that feeling now? And what does it provide for him to do these strategies over a few months? And then we would ask deeper questions around, how does that relate to his beliefs and values and history and fears and, desires and all of that? And what's the big picture vision here and all of that? And usually when you ask those questions, then it sparks the person's creativity to find something he's clear on that he could then reassure you about. Sometimes we just need to dig deeper. But
one thing that came to my mind as you were going into the wonderful detail about what was going on with Jody Lynn's situation is, in order for, and this is true for almost any technique, by the way, but in order for this to actually work, you have to be willing to apply it. I mean, I'm kind of going back to the victim mindset. The victim is like, I'm a victim. Hey, that's what I do. Welcome to my world. I am the victim here.
And we all have
it adds up to, you have
we
to
all have
take a step.
Sorry, I keep interrupting you, but I'm just validating. We all have that part of our psyche that is a victim. We all slip into that sometimes. And no, it's true. And it's like, what I do when I work with someone who's a victim is I just sidestep their thoughts. They're like, it's never going to get better. I'm like, yeah, you feel really hopeless right now. It makes sense that you would feel hopeless given how difficult your situation is. Let's take our attention off the future and just talk about how hopeless you're feeling right now and give you empathy for that.
So, but going back to the validation step, basically.
And is this the first time you felt helpless, or is this a pattern for you? And do you normally go to helplessness when things aren't going your way? And that makes sense. Where did you learn that pattern? And I'm curious if, now that you feel validated, if there's a way where we can, even if you don't believe it's possible, just brainstorm, what would you want if you could have it? Even if you don't believe it, that you could. What is one little snippet of what you would desire instead? And if they don't know, I kind of guess for them.
Yeah, nothing like a little.
And not you, but someone else in your situation. Do you? But it's like, you have to start with validating the feelings, because if you don't, then the person's just going to keep arguing with why their thoughts make sense. Because the reason why we develop limiting beliefs is to stop feeling unpleasant feelings. And so that's still going on. The reason why we're like, it's never going to get better, is because actually believing that makes us feel resigned instead of hopeless, which feels better in our body. Resignation is like apathy. It's like ennui. It's like, oh, whatever, who cares? I'm just going to look at my phone now, right? That actually feels better than hopelessness.
Marginally, yeah. Actually feeling better, but I can see how someone would think that it feels a little bit better.
Yeah.
Or I'm just a victim, so I'm just going to use that as an excuse to do whatever I want, Yeah. So it's like, that feels better than just hanging out in the hopeless energy. So that's why, when I meet someone like that, it's like, because emotions feel better when someone's empathizing with you. So it's like, if someone has a victim mindset, then I just validate their feelings, but not their thoughts.
Yeah. We're beginning to appreciate how powerful that distinction really is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. As usual, as we have these conversations, I look and I say, there's only 5 minutes left. Where did it all go? But that also means we usually have to figure out how we're going to tie it all together. And we have like 3 things that we do with every episode. The first one, probably the most important one, is, Valerie, there may be somebody listening in who thinks that you're probably the one to work with. And if they're there, we should actually let them know how to find you, don't you think?
Yes, that'd be nice. I do have a website. It actually has my free gifts on it too. The one that I would give to the audience for this topic is I do have a free video training on my website called 3 Steps to Stop Fighting and Start Connecting. And I made it actually in 2016, so it was a while ago. But it's cute. I have a little detective hat on because it's about being a detective and going deeper and finding out the feelings and needs underneath their point of view. And I even created a little infographic about that. That you can use when you're in the middle of an argument. So, and it includes like a email training course on how to get to the deeper issue, to the deeper feelings and needs underneath the argument, and like case studies and whatnot. So, you can find that. I'm happy to email you the direct link to that free gift. But if you go to my website, it's coachvaleriegreene.com. So that's COH, coach, like spelled COACH, and then Valerie Greene, which is VALERIE, and there's an E at the end of Green. Then you see all my free gifts, and that's one of them.
And we'll be sure to include that in the show notes too. We try to make it a little bit easy for people, if we can, to reach and find you. And that's like one of the best ways to do that. So we'll be sure to do that. I just had to ask you, when you did the detective thing, were you wearing the calabash and the meerschaum pipe and all that? I mean, doing the whole thing. I'm kind of curious,
I was wearing a little suit blazer, but
okay.
I had a flashlight. I did. I was like, I'm a detective with a flashlight. I didn't have the pipe.
You get some AI and add it now.
Second thing we like to do at the end of every show is I like to go to Jody Lynn to get her perspective on how she ties the whole thing together, because she has such a wonderful way of kind of framing the whole thing and just really tying it together. So Jody Lynn, what you been thinking about here?
Oh my gosh. I think that this is such an important topic that we're talking about today in the context of having good relationships, not only with yourself, but the people around you. And I see a lot in our society that we have a tendency to just give up and leave. And I know that I was like that for a really long time, like, F you, I'm out of here. But something that I've come back to a lot over my life is you take you everywhere you go. And so I had the same realization as you, Valerie. You're very similar of like, what am I doing in all these bad relationships? I really need to go within. And that changed everything. From that space, I could finally see me. And the way you put it was so beautiful, that emotions and needs versus the strategy. Understanding that about yourself is invaluable for you walking through this life, and understanding that and how you can utilize that same skill with your partner will definitely bring more intimacy into the relationship, because it's like taking the masks off and seeing each other for the first time. And I think what you're doing is such beautiful work. So thank you for this reminder today to challenge our thinking and to really observe what's going on and have the relationship that we truly desire with ourselves and others.
Yes, thank you. And, it sounds like you do really amazing work as a money coach too.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
I see. I make it a practice to only have amazing people here on the show. So that's why you both are here. Just setting the record straight. And along those lines, that actually leads into the third thing we like to do at the end of every program. This is something I started a few years ago because I noticed there's this big gap in the way that we think about and understand living in the 21st century. Because in the 21st century, we can do something that you couldn't do in previous centuries. We can communicate via the internet. I mean, you're in Jersey City, I'm in Connecticut, she's in Alberta. We got listeners all over the world, and all because of this wonderful technology that's going on here.
Yeah.
And the technology has allowed us to do social media and blog posts and create books and all kinds of stuff, courses. And we're putting out all this stuff. And a lot of it we're putting out as free content because we've learned stuff. We want other people to share in the content. And that's where I noticed there's a gap. Because we're putting out all this content and we don't get credit for it most of the time. We're helping people. We don't even know that we're helping them. I mean, we see downloads. That's about all we ever know. And then they're grabbing it and saying, oh, wow, I got to use this piece. And they put it in their life and something happens. And most of the time, we never even find out about it. Mm-hmm. I said to myself, we need to do something about that. So Valerie, on behalf of those people you've never met, never seen, never will meet, never will see, who you've been helping in ways you don't even know about just by putting this content out there. On their behalf, thank you for what you're doing because you are making a difference in this world.
Yes.
Oh, well, likewise. I mean, you said it yourself that, you see all these downloads. So I'm sure many people are benefiting from the other episodes too.
Well, we certainly appreciate you sharing your knowledge and your insights for this download. And for those people who are benefiting from it, they're thanking you as well. So best of luck with what you're doing. Keep doing it. We appreciate you taking the time to share it with us today.
Yes, and likewise.
And thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.